if I fix, quote unquote, my depression, I'm not going to be funny anymore. Have you heard that?
I have not heard that.
Well, people say that.
Okay.
People say, guys, I'm going to try not to shout on the mic. But welcome back to another episode of The Things You Can't Touch. This is the only podcast where philosophy meets the real world. And today, our guest is known as the LinkedIn Warrior on TikTok and is currently named as a top 150 future leader in the UK. This national award-winning poet and founder of Spoken Vision hopes to inspire other young ethnic minority students to show that they can achieve their dreams whilst following their creative passions. Join us as we touch on the things you can't quite put your finger on, but won't stop thinking about. Please welcome Ife Alabi.
You saying?
Welcome, Ife. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
And obviously, you don't know your question because that's what we do.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're happy to be here. Hopefully, when I tell you your question, you will be happy to be here as well. Anyway, okay, I'm going to start with the question and then I'll let you know the relevance. And whilst I'm telling you the relevance, I'll probably give you some time to think about the question.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
If... I love how prepared you are already. Okay.
Yeah,
if we alter our mental health, does that alter our identity? That's the question. And the importance of this is that this is coming out in November. It's going to be Men's Mental Health Month. And I feel like it's important to have black boys, black men talking about mental health. But don't feel like you need to have any specific knowledge about it. It's more of a philosophical conversation than one that has like psychological research, if that makes sense. But yeah, please take it away. If you need me to restate the question, I can.
The question was, if we alter our mental health, does that alter our identity?
Yeah.
I think mental health and identity are intrinsically linked.
Wow.
So when I first kind of like think about that question, where it kind of takes me from is that, especially as like, if we look at it from the scope of black men, what are the things that are predominant in our mental health, and how does that kind of encapsulate who we are as individuals? So like, if we go on the notion of like hustle culture, for example, a big thing that is installed within our mentality is that we normally come from low socioeconomical backgrounds or something, or we have a drive that we need to attain something in order to arrive to a destination of like happiness, and as a result it then leads directly into our identity. I'm a hustler, I go do this, I try and make money because of that mental health. So I think to answer your question, I think with any shift in mental health is a shift of, it is going to definitely lead to a shift of identity, because they're so linked together. And especially as black men, all the things that we are kind of installed in as from a childhood kind of perspective naturally leads to our behaviorism.
Okay, I'm going to hold on to that. I really, really liked your answer, honestly. Like, it was such an extended answer when you barely got anything. So I think in philosophy, what we usually do is just define a question. So we're going to hold on to what you said and see if you still agree with yourself by the end of the episode. Okay, so how would you define what constitutes your identity primarily?
I don't think it could be narrowed down to one thing.
Yeah, that's what I was even going to ask. I was even going to ask, is there like a shopping list of things you tick off and then that's your identity?
It's not a shopping list, but again, this is where the concept of identity also then links to religion.
Yeah.
So I think me as an individual, a big part of my identity is God, and then everything else then stems down from it. I think that's not the case with everybody, but I think that when it comes to an individual and their identity, there's like a big pillar kind of idea, and then from that all these different things flow down. So if your identity is consumed around making money, then what trickles down is your behavior. Are you like your hustler? I wake up at 4 a.m. to make this. What is it? You're a go-getter. I don't mind doing X, Y, Z. And then obviously in certain cases it can turn into negative kind of ideas of, I'm going to do anything by any means.
By any means, yeah.
But again,
if people start becoming scary.
If we're then using the example of God, placing God at the center, naturally, if that is your kind of like figure, that is the most important thing. Naturally, all of your behaviorisms and how you act is from that pillar point. So I think to answer your question, everybody, no matter who you are, has a big kind of idea or ideology that they follow, whether that is religion, whether that is money, whether that is other things, and then from that,
Yeah.
other things trickle down in which make up your identity.
So your identity is a core. So it's a thing, as opposed to an amalgamation of
I
things.
believe so.
Okay, cool. If that's how we're defining it, we're gonna hold on to that before we move on. Do I agree with you? I feel like I don't agree with you at the moment.
That's all right.
Yeah, I feel like your identity is an amalgamation of your different experiences that you've had that forms your identity. Because even as you were talking about black boys, when you're growing up, you have a specific thing that is projected onto you, specific expectations projected onto you, and that creates and formulates your experience of life. And that's what also then, by extension, creates your identity. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way. This is just my opinion. This is what I think. And you are feel free to disagree with me how I disagreed with you. But with that being said, I feel like you're touching on something else that I wanted to talk about, which is when I first wrote this question, it actually said, if we alter our mental health, does this alter our personality? So I think what I want to ask you is identity interchangeable with personality, or are they two different things? Is your personality part of your identity? Yeah.
It's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
I think identity and personality work side by side. That makes sense. When I think of the word identity, I think about it, that is your core person.
Yeah.
Who are you down to the bone?
Yeah.
And then your personality now shifts depending on social setting. So that where I kind of disagree with you now is that you talked about your identity is based off your experiences.
Yeah.
I would say your personality is based off experiences. And your identity is your core ideas that you follow because of whether that is your, like, kind of, as I explained, your core pillar, if that makes sense.
Which can often be religion, as you mentioned. Okay, do you know what? You're convincing me, Loki, but like we'll keep going and we'll see. I think the last thing on this like part that I wanted to say is your mental health in that sense, like in that case, the same as your mind, or is your mental health like an aspect of it? Because as you're talking about identity and like your core being, obviously this is a metaphysical thing, like something that you can't touch, things you can't touch. Anyway, something obviously that's intangible. So I think, yeah, what I'm trying to ask is, when we're talking about mental health, are we using that interchangeably with the mind? Is your entire mind your mental health, or is it just a part of it?
I want to flip it back to you, actually.
Wow,
In this
okay.
context, how would you define mental health? Because I think an agreed definition can then allow us to truly dissect the question.
I agree. I'm not going to use a Google definition because I just don't have time to do that. So for me, I think when it comes to mental health, it's like just the typical anxieties, the depressions, the ADHDs, the neurodivergencies that often come up. So that's what constitutes mental health to me, even though I know it's definitely more than that in terms of like, are you happy? Type beat. Like, how are you feeling right now? So you can either take the broader definition of like, how do you feel? Even though even that is even quite narrow in and of itself. But you can also just go and focus on the typical things that pop up when people mention mental health.
Okay, and now, sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
Main question?
Yeah, the main question.
If we alter our mental health, does that alter our identity?
I think based off that, a kind of agreed definition, I would say so. Because as you kind of alluded to in your definition,
Yeah.
mental health is more of a present something that is in the present, but is ultimately changeable.
Yeah.
And if something can change, I think, again, kind of using the metaphor I was using before, if mental health is something that is malleable and can be changed, once they are changed in a certain way, that then naturally pivots to change in behavior, in which then changes identity. I kind of envision it as a flow state.
Okay.
So when we're asking about does your mental health make up identity, I think yes. So like if we're using it in a positive context of I'm starting to get a lot of positive thoughts, and then as a result, I have positive mannerisms and positive behavior, which then leads me to have a like positive identity.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But I think it's something that doesn't happen quickly.
Okay.
But it's through a process. But
Yeah.
if it's through, I think through a quite like long-winded process, if mental health is directed in a sort of way in which then leads to a change in behavior, I believe then it then links to identity, but not in the short term, only in the long term.
So your whole identity is a process. So your identity is not one fixed thing.
I don't believe it can ever be one fixed thing.
Okay, so quickly just taking that back to what you were saying earlier, how then is your identity a core? Or is the core Like, is the core in flux? Is it constantly changing?
I think the core is something that stays stagnant, but even in it staying stagnant, it changes a bit. But
Okay.
it's like you're the same individual you are 10 years ago, but there's just certain aspects of you that has changed due to experiences and changes in mental
Okay.
health. I hope it's a
I
very
feel like I
convenient
understand
thing.
what you're
Yeah.
saying, but what I'm thinking is, do I agree with that? Because I think that also then leads us to another question, which we're not going to pack now because otherwise we'll be here forever, which is, are you just your mind or are you also your body? Because when you say I am the same person as I was physically, yes, even that is debatable. Your cells like completely change every 10 years, apparently, according to science. Don't quote me on that. I'll double check the facts. But yeah, I'm 20, so my entire body has changed twice. So am I really the same person that was born? But that's a different question. So I think the point of contention that I have with what you said is that your identity is the same because you are the same person, basically. But for me, I don't think your physicality has anything to do with your identity. In fact, okay, no, it's too much of a broad statement. It has something to do with your identity because, for example, if I believe that your experiences lead to your identity, then your experiences happen to your physical body, no? So therefore, your body has to have something to do with who you are. But I don't think it has that much weight as your statement put on it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, cool. Have you heard this idea floating around on like socials when people say if people cure their mental health condition, then like they're not gonna be funny anymore. Like for example, if like if I fix quote unquote my depression, I'm not gonna be funny anymore. Have you heard that?
Have not heard that.
Well, people say that.
Okay.
People say that yeah, I've seen quotes about it. Like they don't, well, not that they don't want to. Of course, like they do because I don't know who really wants to be depressed. But I think it's a joke. But I feel like there's a sense of truth in the joke. What do you? What does that make you think? Yeah, basically, when I say that.
So to make sure I understand that, because so
Yes.
it was the thing that's happening on social media right now, that people are saying if they cured like something wrong with them,
Yeah.
they would lose
Their personality,
uh,
like their
they would
funniness.
lose their personality.
Basically, I think that's how I'm interpreting it because like being funny is usually a core part of someone's personality. So it's like, yeah, what do you do with that?
Having taken it from like a certain perspective, I wouldn't say you lose funniness. You just lose you lose that certain aspect of yourself. But it doesn't mean that you can't grow into like a new. Like the question is a bit like the statement in itself is basically saying, "Oh, like if I cure myself of my mental health or my mental health problem, I'm now no longer who I was before,
Yeah,
and I can never be that person."
yeah,
And like
basically,
to a degree, I say yes. Like
yeah,
if that is saying, like, I do think like once you've overcome a certain situation, you're no longer the individual
that
you
you were
are,
before, yeah.
but you still share those experiences that build up to who you are going to be in the future. So I think to kind of like answer that, I do believe the statement itself. I get like it's trying to be ironic and kind of like a joke, but I do believe there's truth to it. Like
Yeah, exactly.
once you've improved or once you've gotten over a certain situation or experience,
Yeah,
you're no longer the individual you were
that you were
before.
before.
But those experiences now build you up to who you are, will be in the future.
Yeah, I think I want to understand the sadness there, though, because I think maybe as human beings we just have an attachment to our identity because that's the only true thing that we can call ours. Do you know what I mean? So it's like something that is so quote unquote bad is something that people are clinging onto because that's something that they can call theirs, which is just yeah, it was so interesting to me. That's why I wanted to just bring up here. The other thing that I wanted to say though is you see that core that you spoke about at the start, isn't that who they are as opposed to like okay, what I'm trying to say is isn't the mental health condition a false version of them because they develop it, if that makes sense. And also, what we've realized that that's a neurodivergence. So it's not typical. It's not usual. It's not original. I don't want to say the word normal because it's offensive to some people, but that's basically where I'm going. I've said it now, haven't I? So what I'm trying to say is, doesn't that mean that that isn't the identity? So when you're like working on and trying to cure basically your mental health condition, aren't you now reverting to who you really are? Do you understand the question?
I believe I do. I think I'm just taking time to
Yeah, no,
process.
please do. Please do. It's something that yeah.
So you're saying that if you have a mental health problem and you're trying to cure that, you're in that process. You're reverting back to your original self.
Yeah, because I think people have
Okay.
an attachment to their identity as their mental health condition. But what I'm saying is, isn't that not your identity? Because that's you plus the mental health condition,
I
not you.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that instance. Yeah, I believe
Okay.
that. Like in terms of that context, everybody has like again a core personality.
Yeah.
And I think when we're introducing mental health problems, it's almost like it's a false edition of who they are. It's a false edition of who they are.
Exactly.
It's almost like if you were to duplicate something, but just highlight all the negatives. That's exactly what it is. I think I agree with you in the idea that in that process of trying to revert back to your former self, you're denying that false version of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Exactly. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that was just another thing that crossed my mind, and I found it very interesting. Yeah, you basically touched on the point that I said, because like ultimately, doesn't the addition of the mental health condition actually alter them and make them someone who they aren't? And what I think I wanna ask is, isn't it better to cure it so that they can be their actual self? Do people want to be their actual self?
Ooh, that's a deep one.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting one, yeah, because when we're going on the topic of like mental health conditions, it's it's so hard for an individual to see that what they're believing in is damaging them more than helping them. It's almost like it's a dependency that the way it's shifted in their brain is that I need you to survive, and in holding on to it, they're really killing like that. It's killing them off. So I feel like again, it's not as easy just to say like to let it go and to like in the idea of it's bad, you need to think it. Like, that's why in the process of like mental health, it's really important that we understand that it's a process. And in that process, it's one coming to the realization that the view that they've built up with them of themselves now is false and
Yeah.
needs to be basically that needs to die in order for them to go back to their original self.
Yeah. I think I agree. But it's so, because that's what you're used to the whole of the time that you've experienced it. It's something that you want to hold on to, and especially if it's something that has been underlying and you've been living with that mental health condition up until a point, like so much so that you don't even realize you have it until it becomes apparent when you're a lot older. And then I think it's hard because you have to basically get rid of, like as I said, I'm 20. Get rid of 20 years of my identity and basically start from scratch. But that's me. That's who I am. That's all I've ever known. That's all I've ever been. That's all I ever can be, and that's all I ever want to be. Because after 20 years, I'm not starting again. Like, I'm not. So it's like, I understand where the mindset comes from, and I dare say I even agree with it. But yeah, it's just about overcoming it. Anyway, cool. Now, I'm gonna do something that's, I don't know if it's fun. I don't know if you're gonna have fun doing it, but we're gonna move on to a game
Okay,
segment
go
of
for it.
this now. We're moving into the thought experiment section. Have you done a thought experiment
I've never
before?
done a full experiment in my life.
Okay, philosophy is fond of thought experiments. Disclaimer to the public, this is a thought experiment. Everything here is purely and highly hypothetical. Nothing is what anyone will actually do, especially because the situation is most likely not to happen. So please do not cancel anybody. Don't worry. I don't think anything here is cancelable. So okay. This is called the teleportation. I will say that word again.
Teleportation.
Teleportation
Okay.
paradox. Someone called Derek Parfit created it. He is a philosopher who contributed to the conversation of the philosophy of mind, which is why it's relevant. But this is the experiment. If you are teleported by being disassembled and reassembled somewhere else, and this disassembling breaks you down into specific atoms, and don't worry, every single atom is accounted for, do you remain the same person?
I've heard of this theory before. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting. See, now, I think my take on this, is that who are you?
Wow.
Like, when I say that question, like, if I'm gonna try and throw it back to you, who are you?
Like,
How do we
what
answer that question of
is
you?
you?
If that makes sense,
That
because
is genuinely a question, like a separate question, but I understand the relevance of why we'll need to answer it.
the reason I say that is because in a the most generic way to answer this question is say yes. You know, you are the same person. You broke apart for half a minute, half a second, and then you
Probably,
came back
yeah.
as an individual with the same experiences,
Yeah.
same thought of memory.
Yeah.
But the question is, what, like, when we're talking about identity and like who are you, what are the factors of you that consist of you, and that
Yeah.
if they were to go away, even for a split second, that means you no longer exist anymore.
Wow.
I don't know if that's awful,
I just thought, no,
but yeah.
I know, don't worry, I get it. But as I said before, it's my experiences. If I am very Lockean, we're going to get there. There's a guy called John Locke who argues that you or your identity consists of your memories and like a continuous strand of your memories through time. And I very much agree with that. Without my memories or my experiences, I just won't be who I am. Because my experiences genuinely do make my identity. My experience of religion is what makes me religious, is what makes me follow the doctrine of that religion. My experience of school is what that gives me the character, especially if you grew up in South London. Right. And my experience of just interaction with people coming to university makes me who I am, which is why I would argue that if I lose my memory of my experiences, then I will be a different person. I don't think it's as simple as just the physicality. Does that make sense?
I agree with you.
Okay.
That's why I said, to answer your question, I believe that you are still fundamentally the same person,
Okay.
because your experiences are not gone.
Cool.
You understand the memory. You even, I'm guessing in this situation, was it a random teleportation or was it an intentional teleportation?
That's such a good question.
The reason being is that, again, if we're following from a philosophical point of view, if it's intentional,
Yeah.
you know that you're going to be split apart and come back
Yes.
together. I would
Yes.
say you're the same individual because
Yes.
it was a premeditated act.
Yeah.
Knowing that you understand the consequences, you're going to bear those consequences, and the whole part of identity is making choices and being comfortable with those choices.
Facts.
Whereas if it was a random occurrence to anywhere random in the world and you had no depth of control,
Yeah.
that's where I'd probably argue from the perspective of no, because the big thing about identity is control and the ability to understand like one's actions. So if I was to be teleported somewhere and I had no control of those actions, no control of where I was, even though I would agree from the perspective that in that situation, once all those molecules have been split apart and I've been put back together, I'm no longer the same person as I was before, because a key part of my identity was stripped away, which is control.
Your control. I want to unpack that, like that concept. That's so new to me. I haven't heard that before. When people talk about identity, as I said, they talk about experience, they talk about your physical body, they talk about the different intersectionalities that you fall into, they talk about everything, like they talk about your name, your heritage, your family, your friends, the school that you went to, all of that stuff. But I've never ever heard that like part of your identity, or a huge part of your identity according to you, is actually having control. And like specific control over what your actions, your intentions, your decisions. Is that what you're saying? I haven't heard that before. I just wanted to, yeah, just dwell on it just for a minute. Anyway, I don't agree with you.
That's really interesting.
I don't agree with you. I think it's the other way with what you said. You said that if you are aware, it won't change your identity, but if you're unaware, it will. I think if you are unaware, like you don't know that this has happened to you, nothing about your identity will change according to you. And that's all that matters, I think. But if you are aware that this has happened, that means that you have it, like you experienced it, you felt it. Even if you didn't necessarily feel every atom dissipating, you are aware that that is something that has happened to you. So I think with that, it will change your identity. And when I read this thought experiment and I said, yeah, I'm going to use this, I thought this can really be linked to trauma. And it's like, if you are aware of such an experience that happened to you, it will change your identity. But if you know what they say about trauma, you like a lot of the time, one of the side effects is that you actually forget what happened. And then later on, like the memories start coming back. That person, and that's the thing. That's the thing.
Because
That's the
I've got
thing.
something shit
Do you know
after.
what? You say
Honestly,
it.
it's
You say it because
interesting.
I feel like you're gonna say what I was about to
No,
say.
because I was gonna say again, as much as I appreciate that perspective, like if
Yeah.
we're going down the realm of trauma,
Yeah.
like for example, I think the notion you're trying to explain is ignorance is bliss. You know what I'm
Yeah. That's
saying?
exact.
But
Oh wow.
but ignorance is always gonna come knocking at the door one day.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You can only say bliss for a certain period of time, and in
Wow.
itself, that's where I put in terms of identity,
Yeah.
autonomy is at the number one because okay,
Wow.
using your example of trauma, if an individual is known of a trauma,
Yeah.
they understand it,
Yeah.
then they have now the autonomy
And the power and
to
the
act, to
control.
push through it, and to
That's
get to a
right.
place where they're comfortable to live with it, and that is identity because you have control.
Okay.
In a situation where like you're forgetting or you're unaware about it,
Yeah.
there's always a chance that it lingers on top of you because there's a chance of remembrance. You
That's
know
what
what
I
I'm
was
saying?
about to
And
say.
as a result, you're not really living life in the full form of autonomy. You're living it on a day-to-day basis, knowing that at any time, anywhere, it can get snatched from you, and that's not living life. You're living in a prison,
Wow.
which is it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah. And basically what I was gonna say is I began to disagree with myself. That's why I love philosophy. Like honestly, you don't have to have a set opinion. And that's what people don't understand whenever I do these episodes. I'm not necessarily projecting an opinion onto anyone. I'm just speaking. And that's what philosophers do. That was a bit of a what do you call it? A tangent that I just went on. But what I wanted to say is as I was speaking just then, I realized that your trauma is probably going to change your identity, even if you're aware of it or not. And more so if you're not aware of it, if that makes sense. Because people act in different ways and they develop various mental health difficulties as a result of their like trauma that hasn't been tapped into, basically. And you like, I really, really agree with you. If you have the power and the control over your experience and over what has happened to you and over what your decisions and what you do with that, that solidifies your identity as opposed to you just not being aware. If that was good.
That's a really interesting. I like that.
You
That was
liked the
that was really
stream of
interesting.
that we just like it was
Very
good. It
interesting.
was really powerful. Because that's okay, cool. Next part of the thought experiment. We're not done yet. This
Okay.
keeps touching me and I want it to stop. Apologies. The next part is now, what if this reassembling is happening to your mind? And it's like, I feel like we've already more or less unpacked that, but just so that we can actually address the question in and of itself. You see how it was a reassembling of the body. If it's a reassembling of the mind, I think the answer will probably stay the same, more so in that case, which is that if you are aware, then you have power and you have control. So even if, that's the thing, well, your identity will change in both situations, though, won't it? If you are aware that the particles of your mind are reassembling,
Of
and
course.
if you're not aware that the particles of your mind are reassembling, right?
I agree. Yeah, that it's. I think that again, the only difference is that I believe that with knowledge and like something that is known, there's control, and with control, then you can choose for it to do. You can choose for the outcome that happens. So in the instance of if I was to be teleported somewhere, and I have the known idea that my brain has been reconstructed, I have the control to be like, okay, my brain was reconstructed. How does that define me? And if I see that as no difference, I can walk on my day and be absolutely normal. But on the idea that I didn't know my brain was reconstructed, then it comes to, from that point on, has every thought that I've thought, everything that I've done off of my own volition, but or off of the moment that I was teleported. And you see the fact that there's even an indifference there and the lack of clarity means that I'm no longer in control and my identity is now split.
You're now tuned into the Things You Can't Touch podcast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, this is a philosophy podcast.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense, but what I'm trying to think is, am I getting fooled by the fact that what you're saying sounds really nice? Or is it a thing where does control have that much of an important impact? Is it that much related to identity? How related is control to identity, basically what I'm
I
trying
think
to
it goes
ask.
back to the question I said, who are you?
Wow.
How do you, and I say
Sorry,
this
getting asked
because
who are you
who are you
directly
and
is
how would you define yourself? Because the
okay.
reason why I put control at the pedestal is that a big thing for me about identity is the ability to control one's actions and thoughts. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
You do everything you do for a particular reason.
So
and
you
because
know yourself, you
you
know who
know
you
yourself.
are.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
If there's a situation where your thoughts, your actions, your behaviors are controlled by an individual, are you who you are, or are you a result of another person's actions?
So you've given me another thought experiment.
Okay.
If I'm being controlled entirely by someone else, am I still
It's
who
not
I
even
am?
entirely.
If someone controls, like,
Just even a fraction.
okay,
You know what I'm trying to say?
yeah, am I
Like, yeah,
still
I'm talking.
who I
Yeah, when I
am?
say control, I mean a person, like a person, an individual.
Yeah.
If a
If
person can control just one aspect of your life in terms of your thoughts, pattern, and behavior,
yeah,
who are you, and how does that affect who you are?
yeah, wow, yeah. That's all you had to say. I think I get it. Yeah, control. I think I just wanted to interrogate that part of the conversation just for a minute to see, like, as you mentioned, control. Is it that serious? Like, is it that important? And I think it is. And this is just like the tangent I'm about to go on. I don't know how much time we have. I don't know how long we've been here for, but
I'm enjoying this.
what I'm gonna say is, with political authority,
Okay.
what you just said, because we're in a state, are we ever going to have full control of our identity, especially with the intersections that we fall into? And it's like there are so many stereotypes and things being projected onto us as Black people, onto you as a Black man. It's just like, who, like, can we ever really be ourselves in the way that you explained it with your, like, definition of control?
That's a really good way to pivot the question. Honestly,
Have to.
that's really fantastic. Okay,
Thank
cool.
you.
I think talking
No one has
from
said I'm fantastic before.
I think okay, that's such a juicy question. Cool.
Yeah.
I think okay, if we're talking it from a political perspective, and I'm talking it from like me growing up as an individual, I think that the state projects on things that should be a part of your personality. And if we're talking at the realms of stereotypes and like especially Black men stereotypes, there's a big stereotypes of what is it? You, if I see you in a certain way or across a certain way, I know you're belligerent, you're thug, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. And I believe that all of these are influences from the state. But this is where I still believe that to a certain degree we have autonomy to encapsulate those feelings that
Yeah.
the state wants to project onto us.
Yeah.
So like in my own life,
We have the decision to say I accept that for myself,
you know what I'm
or
trying to say?
I don't.
And again, it's not easier said than done.
It's not.
You know what I'm trying to say? It's
Yeah.
it's
But I
when
think that's the joy of life, though.
that is the
the game.
that is the joy. That is the
Yeah.
game. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
I always say it like this. For example, I could have conformed to what society said I
You
should
could
be.
have, but you're a LinkedIn warrior instead.
But instead, like again, all of those are influences, and those influences did to a large degree
Yeah.
affect how I grew up. I wanted to be chilling with the bad boys in the
Yeah,
gang. You know what I'm
no,
saying?
real, yeah.
I wanted to, I wanted to have that high life of what like, people. I always thought people are thinking about this. People are placing these thoughts onto me. I should just encapsulate them. I can't be asked.
Yeah.
But then I still believe, especially at least in this country, we have to some degree a level of autonomy to break out those influences. And the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about autonomy, the more you lean into it, the larger autonomy you get. If that makes sense. And yeah, I could go into a whole rabbit hole talking about how the use of social media and all these other things can create that personal autonomy for you.
Yeah.
But again, it links back to the reason why we don't see it as often in society, and like a lot of people fall under the stereotypes. It's not because of like people are weak-minded. It's just it's what we said about it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's
You know what I'm
difficult.
trying to say?
Yeah. Wow. I wouldn't even like. I feel like, yeah, we're almost like all the way through the thought experiment now.
Okay.
But like I really, really enjoy where we've gone at this point. But the next part is if significant shifts in mental health can be like the reassembling of our mind, then what? So we were talking about how the mind is being reassembled, like because we're transporting, maybe teleporting, whichever one it is again. If that is specific to our mental health, what does that change anything, or are we just still in the same place?
Sorry, just repeat the question. I
You
really
see
want to
how
answer that.
we said you're teleporting
Yeah.
and your atoms. We start with the physical body. What will happen then? And then we change to the mind. I think this is now splitting the mind and the mental health from each other. So if it's just your mental health, that is disassembling and then reassembling. What does that do for us, if anything? And are we still in the same place? Is it still the same thing as for the physical body and the mental mind?
I think this is where it gets a bit technical.
Yes.
Because where I believe that I believe to a certain degree, like your person and your mind are kind of two very stagnant things that still have the ability to change.
Yeah.
I think mental health is probably the most fluid aspect.
Yeah. So
That makes
volatile.
sense. It's
Yeah.
very volatile and it's
Yeah.
due to experiences and like what happens in life. So I think in the example of if you get teleported, so I'm guessing it, I'm making just so I really understand.
Yeah.
You're teleported.
Yeah.
Yeah, your now mental health breaks into different fragments.
Yeah.
And let's say I was feeling the mental health of happiness,
Yeah.
and I get my mental health gets split into fragments, and I now then come back together.
Yeah.
Am I still the same person from a mental health perspective?
Yeah.
I think again it comes back to what we were saying about I think awareness and not of awareness. That's when it can change the topic of how we see this. For example, if I was not aware that I was a happy individual, I was happy but I just wasn't aware, and I got teleported, and then I came back, and then from that then point on I was happy again. Was that happiness like what? It's a hard question. Like, was that happiness caused because of that? Like when I came back, or was it always present there before? But then that event kind of highlighted it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I feel like you're linking to the next question I'm basically gonna ask, which is what if two things? What if you're like the atoms, because originally everything went back to the same place. What if it shifts? What if everything just reassembles in different places? And the second thing, what if some atoms go missing? What then?
That's when I would go from the perspective of you're not the same individual.
You're different
Because
now,
you
isn't
are
it?
different.
Yeah.
And cool. When people think about difference, they think about it as, oh my days, you are the mad different person. No,
Yeah.
you could change by
1%.
one hair on your head gone,
Yeah.
or you could change from some one memory that you had now isn't there.
Yeah.
But I think fundamentally, from a philosophical level, you've changed.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But do I believe that change is going to be detrimental all the time? No.
Yeah.
But
And that's the thing.
I do believe that you have changed.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to say this at the end, but I just might as well say it now. I feel like sometimes, oh, by the way, thought experiment's over.
Okay.
Back into just normal conversation.
Okay.
I feel as though there's always an underlying assumption that it's bad. Change is bad, and that if you are no longer who you were before, that's a bad thing. But I think we need to begin to just accept the fact that change is sometimes good, or sometimes change is just neutral. Sometimes it's just okay. Everything can be fine. Yeah, that's just the thing I wanted to say. Do you want to add anything to that? If not, we can move
Is
on.
change fundamentally bad? I would also say, if I'm going philosophical, I don't think we should always get accustomed to change though.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Please go.
Like,
ahead.
I think change is a beautiful thing
Yeah.
to introduce you into a new season of life. You know what I'm gonna say?
Yeah.
But people also get comfortable with changing when things get uncomfortable. And I think a big
Ooh, like you're running away now.
like a big thing for me I always kind of see is that like as a society we're so accustomed to as soon as one thing gets bad we cut.
Run away.
And from a mental level,
Yeah.
what does that do to our
Yeah.
schema in terms of once we're presented with this problem again?
Yeah.
Because life is so unexpected, and throughout growing with life, the problems we get are going to be so much harder. And if we, especially from a young age, grow accustomed to the idea of something's hard, I need to leave, something's hard, I need to leave, I think it can explain a lot of it can explain the proliferation of problems that are plaguing our communities
Yeah.
and our society right
Yeah.
now. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's it's a very change. It's a very interesting concept because when we look at change, we see it as a good thing. It's a new season.
Yeah.
Something's changed, which means, especially from a Christian perspective, we kind of see change as, okay, cool, I'm moving in the right tone.
Yeah.
Something good is happening. It's naturally associated with a new season and something new that's going to improve your life.
Yeah.
But I also see change as, if something's changing too much in your life, it should also be a time or awakening for an introspection. What am I doing wrong? What is something in my life that I need to reevaluate, that things are moving in such a fast pace all the time?
Fair. I liked that.
Sorry, I like that sort of.
I really, really liked what you said,
interesting.
because I think that's another thing that people often forget. Sometimes it's not. Don't just sit down in what you're used to. If you're used to people saying that change is good, if you're used to people saying that change is bad, the whole point of us being here is genuinely just to interrogate our assumptions that you just go through life constantly living. Anyway, what I want to do now is begin to take a look at some philosophical theories in terms of mind and see what you have to say about them. We don't need to spend time on them at all. As I said, John Locke said that our identity consists in the continuity and memory and time. I said that. You don't agree with his thing, don't really like him. That's fine. But he ultimately says that if we lose this continuity of our memories through time, then by altering our mental health, if we link it, it will make us to feel detached from ourselves. Do you get that? And yeah, do you get that? He doesn't specifically talk about mental health, but if we were to relate it to mental health, if we change our memories and our experiences and we therefore change our mental health, it will make us feel detached from ourselves. But again, I feel like that feeds into the underlying assumption that that's bad. Even if that is the case, so what?
Is detachment necessary for growth?
I don't know.
Because that's, I think,
serious questions here.
I think that's the next way you need to take kind of this theory. For example, if we're using the idea of if we're using the idea of mental health, and if we're using the idea of I don't want to say normal, but let's say continuity in terms of your identity. Naturally, there needs to be a departure between the thing that's plaguing you. Let's say you're what an individual's going through mentally that may be affecting their continuity in order for there to be a point where you come back to who you are. So that's why I disagree with the idea. That's why I kind of disagree with it, because I believe that, especially in the process of if someone's going through something mentally, a departure between because the theory says if you rebuild yourself, you've now become almost lost, because you've lost who a falsification of yourself that the mental health kind of health kind of crisis built up, and as well as your real self. Real self, quote unquote. I would say that departure is necessary.
I agree.
In order for I think that departure is absolutely necessary. That makes sense. Because the state you were before were two combating things that are just going to ultimately lead to your detriment. And in separation, where there may be temporary kind of thoughts of, oh, I'm kind of lonely, I don't know who I am anymore, that kind of absence of identity, through that you then learn the skills so that when you kind of go back on the right track, you are then reaffirmed in who you are. That makes sense.
There's so much I want to say, but because time is literally running out, one thing I will say is I won't necessarily play devil's advocate, but I feel like on the other side, one could argue that growth doesn't necessitate detachment, in a sense that a flower, it grows, but it doesn't have to separate from itself. It builds on where it already has. But whilst on the other hand, you also have caterpillars. In order to become a butterfly, you need to leave your shell behind. So it's just maybe growth looks different to different people. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just here to think, and the thinking is getting to me. I don't know.
I think using the plant analogy, one thing I would caveat is saying that as well as like plants are able to grow and they don't have to separate from their roots. Some acquire weeds in which kill the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. And
So
whilst they're there, they don't really go very far, do
you
they?
know what I'm trying to say? So like if we're using again a plant analogy, I think it's like there's a necessity that is necessary for that plant to grow, and that necessity for the plant to grow is to be detached and for those weeds to be pulled out of that plant.
Yeah.
And in that process of the
That's
weed being pulled out of the plant, it's attachment. You're feeling lost, something that you felt so much comfort with, and helped you kind of get to with everyday life, even though that it was killing you internally, but you don't know. In that time of getting pulled out, it feels like I'm lost. I don't know who I am because I can only remember who I was with it. Once that kind of thing is taken out of your life, and through a bit of time, that plant then realizes I can live by myself. I'm now redefined in who I am as a plant, and I didn't need that weed. I didn't need that thing to subsist off myself. To survive. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
It does. It really does. The next theory I wanted to talk about, I don't think it's necessary to go into it because it links to the previous one, but to the people listening, if you do want to go do more research, I don't know if you're interested, please do look for Existential and Phenomenological Perspective by Sartre and the Beauvoir. So that's John Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who ultimately argue that identity is seen as continually shaped by experience, which is quite similar. But I think they focus on the fluidity of the self in relation to your existence, and then they also focus on perception, which I think brings in like just a completely different layer, a different dimension to the conversation when it comes to perception. How are you perceived?
I really like that.
That's what I
want to go.
You want to get into time is flying.
I'm sorry.
Just do so I can.
So
please.
So cool. So I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking. So that theory basically states that identity is largely shaped by perception.
Yeah.
And I agree. Yes. But there's a caveat.
There is. Please, okay, go
There's
ahead.
such a caveat. There's a caveat of everything. Okay, I think if we're looking at identity from the realms of perspection,
yes,
I think that it doesn't. Someone's perspective of you doesn't make up your personality, it grounds your personality.
Okay.
That's where I think it's different.
I agree. Okay.
Cool. For example, if you're known as an individual who does a certain thing, you didn't do that thing because people know that of you, if that makes sense. You did it because you did it.
Yeah.
Then people know that you do it. And now, ever since that point that people know that you do a certain thing, that now grounds your own thing. So I'll use my own example. When I came to university, I've always been kind of going into the corporate realm. I've been trying to make myself known in law. Obviously, I started a TikTok.
Yes.
And then once individuals knew that I was known for, I largely saw my identity now being grounded, cemented in that view because of other individuals. So it wasn't that my personality was made by individuals. It was more that my personality was grounded by individuals. I'm known as corporate IA. I'm known as, you know what I'm going to say? I'm known as what individuals say. But I never built that personality off of other people's views. I built that because I wanted to. That was a passion of mine. And then once individuals knew that and that's what they perceived me as, it then grounded my own identity in it.
That makes so much sense. And I see you definitely took a positive twist on the concept of perception. But for me, my mind always goes to negative. And it's like when people perceive you, it's like, you know, for example, with celebrities, someone's career can literally end because of one thing that they do, and that's because of perception. Sometimes you could do nothing, even with being a black boy. Go back to it, you could literally just be walking down the street with your hood up, and because of the perception of you that has nothing to do with you, you get treated in a specific way, and that is what formulates your identity, whether you like it or not. So I think it's theft, quite frankly.
Theft is a great way to describe it.
No, because as I'm thinking about it, it's like you just robbed me of who I am, and you used whatever you want to use to define me and play that into your own narrative of me. And it's just like, we can sit here and talk about the self, we can sit here and talk about identity for how so many hours, but we have to move on. And with the fact that I said narrative, that does lead me on to the next theory. Somebody called Paul Ricouer, These are all French names, guys. I didn't do French. Like, I do apologize for the complete butchering of the people. But he ultimately argues that our identity is a narrative. So it actually consists in the stories that we tell ourselves. And for me, it's just like, I see exactly where he's coming from. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't agree with him because it just sounds too fantastical. Do you know what I mean? Like, it
I've got
sounds a
something
bit
for you,
too, like, what's the word? Illustrative. But I feel like the problem with that is literally linked to what we were saying: other people's perception, other people's stories, other people's narratives of you. Are you you, or are you who everybody else says you are?
and this is that I love that, and I love this guy's theory because it's like, I would say like, it kind of contradicts what I've been saying this whole time. But ever since the introduction of perception, it does change a lot.
Yeah.
Because that is the core question: am I who I am because I believe I'm who I am, or am I who I am off of what other people
People.
see me as?
Yeah.
And I
And
believe
is it
that,
an internalization?
yeah, I think
Wow.
it's if I had to put it into like a percentage, I think you could get split 70-30.
Okay.
70% is who I believe I am, because I
Yeah.
think that's the driving factor. If I have no, if I have no identity, if I have no following, if I have no core belief in who I am, yeah, I will forever be, my personality will forever be leeching off of the people around me.
Yeah.
We all know individuals who don't really know who they are,
Yeah.
and they find themselves in other people. And
Wow.
that's where, and that's why I say the person driving the boat is you all the time. Because if
Yeah.
you're not driving the boat, someone in the back will.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Somebody has to.
But then we also can't neglect the idea of, if a consensus of individuals have one view about you, is that view true or not?
If it,
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think we're just diving too much into the identity part, but it's like that is literally, these are the questions that I'm
That's the
asking
question.
myself.
Because cool, it's like, let's say hypothetically, yeah,
Yeah.
if I was sat in a room of 30 people,
Yeah.
and every single one of
Every
them
single one.
pointed at me and said, he's a great guy,
Yeah.
would the logical
Conclusion
be,
B,
he's a
he's a
great
great
guy?
guy.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So that's why, and then that is a core part of someone's identity, because someone's identity is based off of identity is emotions. You know what I'm trying to say? So whether that is your self emotions about yourself or other people's emotions about you,
Yeah.
that's also a core part that we can't neglect. If I say I'm a happy individual, I am a happy individual because I said it. But if other people say he's a great guy, he also must be a great guy because other people said it.
So it's just really about the narrative.
So
It's
so
the
that's why
narrative
I agree
that
the
can be
idea that
played.
it's a narrative.
That, yeah, your identity
Because
is built off of different narratives.
Because the reason why I really love the idea of narrative when it comes to identity is that individuals who understand that are normally the happiest people on earth and more the most successful individuals.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that, like, I largely follow that philosophy of, like, narrative makes up my identity.
And everything's about perspective.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because what the first thing that kind of popped into my head was affirmations.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, so affirmations, the
Yeah.
belief in, like, the reason, because the idea, like, the philosophical idea of the narratives is that you say who you are, like, you say things that you believe, and that is the story of your life. So I'm smart, and I keep on saying I'm smart for the next 10 years. So as a result, I do become smart.
Yeah.
And it links into, like, a psychological sort of, like, locus of control, and the idea that the things you say onto yourself and the things you truly believe manifest into reality.
Yeah.
And that's a large part of who I am. And I believe I always, in my life, try to paint a positive narrative about myself and who I am. And I think and I feel like if a lot of people in society adopted this narrative type of view about themselves, that I am who I am, and this is the story of my life, and I agree with this, and this is true, and I 100% believe it's true, we would see more of people breaking out the stereotypes that are placed in a box. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think a large reason why individuals may suffer from, like, identity crisis and, like, the idea of they don't really know who they are is because they put more weighting on, or obviously this is kind of generic view, but obviously they place more weighting in what other people believe in them rather than what they believe in themselves. So going back to the boat analogy, they let other people drive their boat.
Yeah. Basically.
But yeah.
Yeah. Just wanted to I think maybe one of the last things is on this view, the view about narratives, doesn't this therefore mean that our mental condition actually adds to our story. Does that make sense? As opposed to like, I feel like, yeah, it's a given on that view. But outside of the view, do you agree?
Does your
Does your mental health add to your story?
I think
Does
it
it make
does.
you like, obviously it makes you who you are, but to
Yeah.
what extent?
Yeah, I think if we're looking at it from like a story perspective, I always see it as like
It's another chapter.
it's a chapter. It's
Yeah.
something that a hero had to triumph in order for them to become to where they need to
Yeah.
be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in that perspective, I do agree with it. I think it
Yeah.
does add on to your story, and obviously, I naturally have a more positive point of view when it comes to things in life. So if we're looking at it from that perspective, what is it? I would say I agree. Like if we're looking at it from like a narrative point of view, mental health, I like the idea of individuals going through something and then naturally overcoming it does add to one's personality because it adds to one's story about how they became to who they are now.
Yeah.
Like you've heard stories of guys who have gone down in the dirt, doing a mad thing,
Yeah.
and then
they come up.
they come up. You know what I'm
It
saying?
changed, something happened, something shifted.
Yeah.
And it changes them forever. Yeah. I just feel as though with the rest of the notes that I have, we're just going to be repeating ourselves. Like, you took us on a journey to where we needed to be at the end of the day. And honestly, if simply because of time, that is the only reason why I'm about to wrap up this conversation. But this has been so good, and I hope, because obviously part of your bio was so that you can inspire other ethnic minorities. I hope people listening to this can actually be inspired by a black male voice who, you're not too old, you're not too young. Hopefully you have some insight to give to the relevant people. And yeah, honestly, just been so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this, honestly.
Really?
I like things that pick my brain,
Yeah,
honestly.
sometimes you just have to have a thing. Just sit and have a thing. Anyway, do you have anything to just say to the people?
How much time do I have?
Just what do you want to say to the people that are asking how much time do you have?
Okay, good. If I had to say something to the people,
Yeah, just a ending note.
you are who you are because of your experiences, and I think when it comes to like, especially like black individuals, it's so important that we use what we've been through in order to take us to where we need to be. A lot of us like to adopt a mindset that because of where I come from, because of who I am, I can never achieve.
Yeah.
And I always adopt the mindset of like, I dare to believe. Like a saying that I love to say is closed mouths don't get fed. In terms of, especially in this life, no matter where you come from, you have, and although it's hard, you have the ability and the autonomy to break out of the perceptions that people place onto you. And once you reach that point of understanding that I don't need to listen to who you are, and because I dare to believe I have a chance to stand, you're going to start seeing things that flourish in your name. And I generally think that is the mindset I adopt.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, I've been able to do the amazing things I've done. And I pray He continues to take me to where I need to be.
Yeah. I literally got goosebumps. Like, I was like, wow. Such a beautiful ending. Anyway, I don't usually have an outro, so I think we can literally just say bye to the people. And
Thank you for
it.
having me.
I thank you for being here. Guys, remember to run up his socials. Everything is in the description below. Yeah, I'll put all your socials in the description and stuff. Like, yeah, just check out his account. Really motivational and inspirational, but waffled enough, guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Applause.